The slap echoed through the store. What happened next left everyone speechless. A routine shopping trip turned into a moment of public humiliation when a store manager struck an elderly black woman in front of dozens of witnesses. The crowd watched in silence, some in shock, others in shame. But what none of them knew, including the manager, was that the woman standing before them with quiet dignity actually owned every brick, every shelf, and every paycheck in that building. In less than 2 minutes, justice would be served without a single raised voice. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. It was a Tuesday afternoon, that quiet pocket of time between the lunch rush and the evening crowd when the store seemed to breathe a little slower. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their sterile white glow across aisles stocked with everyday necessities. Canned goods, fresh produce, household cleaners, and bakery items that filled the air with the faint sweetness of bread and sugar. The store sat on the corner of Martin Luther King Boulevard and Jefferson Street, a neighborhood landmark that had served the community for nearly 40 years. Its worn linoleum floors told stories of countless footsteps, and its walls had witnessed generations of families doing their weekly shopping. Outside, the parking lot was half full, with shopping carts scattered near the entrance, and a few cars parked under the shade of old oak trees that had stood there longer than the building itself. Inside, the atmosphere felt ordinary, almost sleepy. A young mother pushed a cart with a toddler seated in front, the child clutching a stuffed elephant while pointing excitedly at colorful cereal boxes. Near the dairy section, an elderly man in a veteran's cap carefully compared prices on milk cartons, squinting through thick glasses. At the deli counter, a college student waited patiently for her sandwich order, scrolling through her phone with earbuds dangling from her collar. The produce section near the entrance displayed pyramids of apples, oranges, and seasonal vegetables. A store clerk, no more than 19, restocked bananas while humming softly to the music playing through the overhead speakers, a gentle melody that nobody really listened to but everyone unconsciously absorbed. The checkout lanes were quiet with only 2 registers open. A cashier named Marcus, a soft-spoken man in his mid-20s, scanned items with practiced efficiency while making polite small talk with customers. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, something felt different today. It started subtly, like a string pulled too tight, waiting to snap. Near the customer service desk, voices began to rise. At first, it was just a murmur, easily dismissed as a routine complaint or a simple misunderstanding. But the tone sharpened. Words became clipped. Tension crept into the air like smoke. The store manager, a man named Derek Holloway, stood behind the service counter with his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He was in his early 40s, stocky and red-faced, with thinning hair combed over his scalp in a way that fooled no one. His name tag hung crookedly on his navy blue polo shirt, and his jaw was clenched so tight that a vein pulsed visibly at his temple. Derek had been with the company for 12 years, working his way up from stock clerk to manager, and he wore his authority like armor, rigid, defensive, and quick to defend his territory. Standing before him was an elderly black woman, her posture straight despite her age, her hands resting calmly on the handle of a shopping cart that held only a few items: a loaf of bread, some fresh vegetables, a carton of eggs. She was dressed simply in a cream-colored cardigan over a floral blouse, dark slacks, and comfortable walking shoes. Her silver hair was styled neatly, and she wore a pair of thin-frame glasses that caught the fluorescent light. Shoppers nearby began to slow their movements, their attention drawn to the escalating exchange. Some pretended to examine products on nearby shelves while stealing glances toward the service desk. Others stopped outright, standing frozen in the aisles with their carts, uncertain whether to intervene or look away. Derek's voice grew louder, sharp enough now to cut through the ambient noise of the store. "I've told you 3 times already. We don't accept returns without a receipt. It's store policy. I don't care what excuse you have." The woman's voice remained steady, calm, almost gentle. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm simply explaining that I purchased these items here 2 days ago. The expiration date on the milk was already passed when I opened it at home. I only came back to let you know so it doesn't happen to someone else." "You probably bought it somewhere else and are trying to pull a fast one," Derek shot back, his face growing redder. "I'm tired of people like you coming in here thinking the rules don't apply." A hush fell over the nearby area. The phrase, "people like you," hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Customers exchanged uncomfortable glances. A woman near the bakery section covered her mouth with her hand. Marcus, the young cashier, stopped scanning items mid-motion, his eyes wide with alarm. The elderly woman didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stood there, her gaze steady, her dignity intact despite the rising hostility directed at her. Derek's assistant manager, a nervous young woman named Brittany, stood a few feet away, clutching a clipboard to her chest. She looked between Derek and the elderly woman, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the courage. Another assistant manager, a man named Troy, leaned against a nearby pillar with his arms folded, watching the scene with an expression that was equal parts discomfort and indifference. The tension in the store thickened. Shoppers, who had been casually browsing now, stood still, witnesses to something that felt wrong but uncertain how to stop it. A teenage girl near the cereal aisle whispered to her friend, "Should we say something?" Her friend shook her head quickly, fear and confusion written across her face. Derek leaned forward over the counter, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl that somehow carried further than his shouting. "You need to leave. Right now. We don't have room for customers like you who waste our time with fake complaints." The woman adjusted her glasses slowly, deliberately. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing remained even, but something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, not anger, but a deep, quiet recognition. She had seen this before. She had stood in moments like this in different places, different times, facing different kinds of hostility. And she had learned long ago that silence could be its own form of strength. The store held its breath. The hum of the refrigerators seemed louder now. The music from the speakers felt absurdly out of place. A cheerful pop song playing over a scene that was anything but cheerful. And then, without warning, Derek's hand shot out. The slap cracked through the air like a gunshot. Her name was Dorothy Green, though almost no one in this town knew that name carried weight far beyond what her appearance suggested. At 70 years old, she moved with the grace of someone who understood the value of patience, the power of observation, and the necessity of choosing battles wisely. Her face bore the lines of a life fully lived, laugh lines around her eyes, creases at the corners of her mouth that spoke of more smiles than frowns, and a depth in her gaze that suggested she had seen both the best and worst of humanity. Dorothy had been born in this very neighborhood 70 years ago, in a small house 3 blocks from where Riverside Grocery now stood. She was the daughter of a seamstress and a railroad worker, the youngest of 5 children who grew up sharing 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom in a home filled with love, but little else. Her childhood was marked by the Jim Crow South, by colored-only signs and separate water fountains, by lessons her parents taught about dignity in the face of indignity, about pride when the world tried to strip it away. But Dorothy Green refused to let circumstances define her ceiling. At 16, she became the first person in her family to graduate high school. At 22, she earned a degree in business administration from a historically black college, working 3 jobs to pay tuition while her mother prayed every night that her baby girl would make it through. After graduation, Dorothy returned home not with bitterness about limited opportunities, but with a determination to create opportunities where none existed. She started small. A corner store in the neighborhood, barely larger than a living room, where she sold groceries, household goods, and hope to people who had little of the latter. She learned every customer's name, extended credit to families who came up short at the end of the month, and hired teenagers who needed a first job and a second chance. That single store became 2, then 5, then a small regional chain. But success didn't come easy. Dorothy faced banks that wouldn't loan to a black woman, suppliers who quoted higher prices assuming she wouldn't know better, and competitors who spread rumors hoping to drive her out of business. She weathered it all with the same quiet determination that had carried her through childhood, head high, voice steady, actions louder than words. By the time she was 45, Dorothy Green owned 23 grocery stores across 3 states. By 50, she had built a distribution network that employed over 2,000 people, many from communities that traditional businesses had abandoned. She became known in business circles as a force of nature, brilliant, fair, uncompromising on values, but flexible on methods. She married once to a kind man named James who taught history at the local high school. They built a life together filled with Sunday dinners, community activism, and foster children they welcomed into their home when their own children never came. James passed away 8 years ago, leaving Dorothy with memories that still made her smile and a loneliness she carried with the same grace she carried everything else. 3 years ago, when Riverside Grocery's parent company faced bankruptcy after a series of poor management decisions and market downturns, Dorothy saw an opportunity. Not for profit, she had more than enough money, but for purpose. She quietly purchased the entire chain through a holding company, keeping her ownership anonymous. She didn't want fanfare or recognition. She wanted to ensure that the stores serving working-class neighborhoods wouldn't close, that the employees wouldn't lose their livelihoods, that the shelves would stay stocked for families who depended on them. Dorothy installed new management, improved benefits, raised wages, and implemented training programs. But she kept her identity hidden, preferring to observe from a distance, to shop in her own stores like any other customer, to see with her own eyes how her employees treated the community she served. Today, she had driven to Riverside Grocery for a simple reason. She came here every Tuesday to shop, to listen, to watch. She liked seeing the store through a customer's eyes. She liked knowing that the produce was fresh, that the aisles were clean, that the staff was courteous. Usually these visits filled her with quiet satisfaction. But today was different. She had noticed the expired milk when she got home 2 days ago. It was a small thing, easily overlooked, but Dorothy didn't overlook details. She returned not to cause trouble, but to prevent it for the next customer. She expected a simple apology, maybe a quick replacement. What she got instead was hostility, disrespect, and finally, violence. As the sting of Derek Holloway's slap burned across her cheek, Dorothy's mind flashed through 70 years of moments like this, big and small, public and private, each one a test of character. She thought about her mother, who had taught her that dignity couldn't be given or taken, only claimed. She thought about James, who had always said that power meant nothing if you didn't use it to protect the powerless. And she thought about the scared faces around her, customers frozen in shock, employees terrified of their manager, a young cashier whose eyes begged someone, anyone, to make this stop. Dorothy reached slowly into her worn leather purse, her movements deliberate, her expression calm. Inside that purse was her phone, her wallet, and a single document she always carried. A certificate of ownership for Riverside Grocery and its parent company, with her signature at the bottom. Her cheek still stung. Her heart still ached from the familiar pain of prejudice. But her hands didn't shake as she pulled out what she needed. Because Dorothy Green had learned something else in 70 years of living. Sometimes the quietest voice in the room carries the most authority. And in about 60 seconds, Derek Holloway and everyone else in that store was about to learn exactly who had been standing in front of them all along. The moments leading to the slap unfolded with a terrible, inevitable momentum, like watching a car slide on ice toward a collision you can see coming but cannot prevent. Dorothy had approached the customer service desk at 2:47 p.m. with nothing but good intentions. Her small cart contained the spoiled milk in question, still sealed in its plastic jug, the expiration date clearly visible. 3 days passed. She had placed it gently on the counter along with her receipt, which she had fortunately saved in her wallet, and spoke in the same measured, respectful tone she used with everyone. "Good afternoon. I purchased this milk here on Sunday, and when I opened it yesterday morning, it had already gone bad. The expiration date shows it should have been removed from your shelves last week. I'm not looking for a refund. I just wanted to bring it to your attention so other customers don't have the same experience." It was a simple statement, delivered without accusation or anger. Any reasonable manager would have apologized, thanked her for the feedback, offered a replacement, and made a mental note to check inventory procedures. But Derek Holloway was not in a reasonable state of mind that day. He had started his shift already frustrated. Corporate had sent another email about improving customer satisfaction scores. His regional supervisor had criticized him during a conference call that morning. His assistant managers seemed incompetent. His cashiers were too slow, and he felt the weight of expectations pressing down on him from all sides. He was looking for someone to blame, someone to control, somewhere to assert the authority he felt slipping through his fingers. And then Dorothy Green walked up to his counter with a complaint. Derek barely glanced at the receipt. "We can't accept returns without proper documentation," he said curtly, his eyes already dismissive. Dorothy's eyebrows raised slightly. "But I have the receipt right here," she said patiently, tapping the paper on the counter. "And I'm not even asking for a return. I simply wanted to inform you about a quality control issue." "Are you calling me a liar?" Derek's voice rose sharply. The question came out of nowhere, defensive and aggressive. Several customers within earshot turned their heads. Dorothy remained calm, though a flicker of concern crossed her face. "Of course not." I'm just trying to help prevent—" "Help?" Derek interrupted, his face flushing darker. "You come in here accusing my store of selling bad products, demanding special treatment, and you call that help?" "I'm not demanding anything," Dorothy said, her voice still steady but firmer now. "I'm a regular customer here. I've been shopping at this store for years. I'm simply bringing a legitimate concern to your attention." That's when Brittany, the assistant manager, stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Derek, maybe we should just give her a replacement. It's not a big deal." "Stay out of this," Derek snapped at her, causing Brittany to jump back as if physically struck. The young woman's face went pale, and she retreated to a safe distance, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Troy, the other assistant manager, pushed off from the pillar where he'd been leaning and sauntered closer, but his expression showed he had no intention of intervening. He seemed almost amused by the escalating situation, as if watching a reality TV show rather than a real confrontation. Dorothy took a slow breath. She could feel the eyes on her now. At least a dozen customers had stopped what they were doing to watch. Some looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot. Others stared with open concern. A few had their phones out, though whether to record or simply hold something in their nervous hands, it was hard to tell. "Sir," Dorothy said, her tone careful and measured, "I understand you're having a difficult day, but there's no need for hostility. If you'd prefer, I can simply speak with someone else, or I can leave this here and—" "Difficult day?" Derek's laugh was harsh and humorless. "You don't know anything about my day. You don't know anything about running a store, about dealing with people who come in here with fake complaints trying to scam us out of merchandise." The words hung in the air, ugly and accusatory. Dorothy's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but her voice remained level. "I assure you I'm not trying to scam anyone. The milk is genuinely spoiled, and I genuinely purchased it here. I'm simply trying to be helpful." "Helpful," Derek repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He leaned forward over the counter, invading her space. "Let me tell you what would be helpful. What would be helpful is if people like you would stop wasting my time. Stop coming in here thinking you deserve special treatment. Stop acting like the world owes you something." The phrase, "people like you," landed like a physical blow. The store seemed to collectively hold its breath. Even the background music felt obscene in that moment, a cheerful pop song about summer love playing over a scene of barely contained rage and thinly veiled racism. Dorothy's composure held, but something shifted in her eyes. A sadness, perhaps, or a weary recognition. She had heard these words before, in different forms, different contexts. She had hoped she wouldn't hear them again. Not here, not now, not in the store she had saved from bankruptcy with her own money. Marcus, the young cashier at Register 3, abandoned his customer mid-transaction and took a few steps toward the service desk, his face a mask of distress. "Mr. Holloway," he called out, his voice cracking slightly, "maybe we should just—" "Get back to your register!" Derek roared, not even looking at him. Marcus froze, torn between obedience and conscience, ultimately retreating with his head down and shame written across his features. Dorothy straightened her shoulders. When she spoke next, her voice carried a different quality, still calm, still controlled, but with an edge of steel that hadn't been there before. "I will not be spoken to this way. I am a paying customer, and I deserve basic respect. If you cannot provide that, then I suggest you find someone else to handle this matter." Derek's face went from red to nearly purple. In that moment, something snapped inside him. The frustration of his morning, the pressure from corporate, the perceived challenge to his authority from this elderly woman who refused to be intimidated, it all coalesced into a single terrible impulse. His hand came up fast. The slap connected with Dorothy's left cheek with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. It wasn't a playful tap or an accidental brush. It was a full, open-handed strike, delivered with the force of Derek's anger and the weight of his arm behind it. Dorothy's head snapped to the side. Her glasses shifted askew. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, absorbing the impact, processing the violation. The store erupted in gasps. "Oh my God!" a woman near the bakery section cried out. "Did he just—" A man's voice, shocked and disbelieving. "Someone call the police!" another voice shouted. The young mother with the toddler quickly covered her child's eyes and hurried toward the exit, her cart abandoned. The college student at the deli counter stood frozen, her sandwich forgotten, her mouth hanging open in horror. The elderly veteran dropped the milk carton he'd been examining, and it hit the floor with a dull thud, white liquid spreading across the linoleum. Brittany gasped and covered her mouth with both hands, tears instantly springing to her eyes. Troy's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of dawning horror as he realized this had gone far beyond an uncomfortable customer service interaction. Marcus pulled out his phone with shaking hands, already dialing. Dorothy slowly reached up and straightened her glasses. Her cheek burned where Derek's palm had connected, the skin already beginning to redden. She could feel the heat radiating from the spot, could taste the metallic tang of shock in her mouth. Her heart pounded in her chest, adrenaline flooding her system. But 70 years of facing down hatred and injustice had taught her how to master her physical reactions. She did not cry. She did not shout. She did not stumble backward or crumple. Instead, she turned her head slowly back to face Derek, her eyes meeting his with a clarity and strength that seemed to bore straight through him. In that gaze was everything she had survived: segregation, discrimination, the death of her husband, the countless small and large battles she had fought to build something meaningful from nothing. Derek's hand was still raised, trembling now as the reality of what he'd done began to penetrate his anger. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The purple flush began to drain from his face, replaced by a sickly pallor. "Get out," he said, but his voice cracked, the authority gone, replaced by something that sounded almost like panic. "Get out of here now!" Dorothy adjusted her cardigan with hands that refused to shake. She looked around at the frozen crowd, at the frightened faces, the angry faces, the ashamed faces of people who had watched it happen and done nothing. "No," she said quietly. The single word carried through the store like a bell. Derek blinked. "What?" "I said no." Dorothy's voice was soft, but absolutely firm. "I will not be leaving, but you will be." Derek let out a nervous, harsh laugh. "Are you insane? I'm the manager here." "I'm calling security to remove you." "That won't be necessary," Dorothy interrupted, her tone still calm, still measured, but now carrying an undercurrent of something else, something that made Derek stop talking mid-sentence. She reached into her worn leather purse. Dorothy's hand moved with deliberate slowness as she reached into her purse, giving everyone in the vicinity time to see that she posed no threat. Her fingers bypassed her wallet, her phone, the small packet of tissues she always carried. Instead, they closed around a slim leather portfolio she had carried with her for the past 3 years, ever since she'd completed the purchase of Riverside Grocery and its parent company. She never thought she'd need to use it like this. She had imagined, perhaps foolishly, that her anonymity would protect her from ever having to reveal her ownership. She had wanted to observe, to ensure quality, to make certain her investment was serving the community as intended. She had never wanted this moment. But here it was. Derek watched her hand emerge from the purse, his body language shifting from aggressive to wary. For a brief, irrational moment, his mind probably flashed with absurd possibilities. Was she reaching for a weapon, a recording device? His eyes darted to Troy, who had finally stepped closer, looking uncertain about whether he should intervene. What Dorothy pulled out was a single document in a clear plastic sleeve. She placed it on the counter between them with the same gentle precision she had used to place the spoiled milk there minutes earlier. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "you should read this before you call security." Derek glanced down at the paper, his face still twisted with confusion and residual anger. "What is this supposed to—" His voice died mid-sentence. The document was a certificate of ownership, printed on official letterhead from the corporate headquarters of Riverside Grocery Holdings, LLC. The legal language was dense, full of whereas clauses and incorporation details, but three elements were impossible to miss: the official corporate seal embossed at the top, the signature of the CEO and board chairman at the bottom, and the name listed as majority shareholder and owner, Dorothy Elizabeth Green. Derek's eyes moved from the paper to Dorothy's face, then back to the paper, then up again. The color that had drained from his face moments earlier disappeared completely, leaving him looking gray and ill. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. That's not," he stammered, his finger trembling as it pointed at the document. "You can't." "I assure you it's authentic," Dorothy said, her voice still maddeningly calm. "If you'd like to verify it, you'll find my contact information listed with corporate HR. I believe you have their number." Brittany had crept closer, her curiosity overcoming her fear. When she saw what was on the paper, her clipboard clattered to the floor. "Oh, God," she whispered. "Oh, my God." Troy, moving with sudden urgency, pushed past Derek to look at the document himself. As he read, his face underwent a rapid transformation: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally, abject terror. He took 3 quick steps backward, nearly tripping over his own feet, his hand going to his mouth. Around them, customers were beginning to murmur. Those close enough to hear the exchange but not see the document whispered questions to each other. Those with phones raised began recording in earnest now, sensing that something significant was unfolding. Marcus, still on the phone with what sounded like 911, said into his device, "Actually, I think the situation is under control. Thank you." He hung up and walked closer, his eyes wide with disbelief and something that might have been hope. Derek's hands were shaking so badly now that he had to grip the edge of the counter to steady himself. "Mrs. Green," he said, and the shift from his earlier contemptuous tone to this one, formal, desperate, would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. "I didn't know. I had no idea that you were—" "That I was what?" Dorothy asked, and though her voice remained gentle, there was an edge to it now. "That I was someone who mattered? That I was someone deserving of respect? Tell me, Mr. Holloway, at what point should you have started treating me with dignity? When you learned I owned the store? Or perhaps when I first walked up to your counter as a human being? The question hung in the air, unanswerable. Derek's mouth worked soundlessly. Sweat had broken out across his forehead. His eyes darted around the store, looking for an escape route, for support, for anything that might save him from the consequences rapidly materializing before him. It was a misunderstanding, he tried, his voice pleading now. I was having a difficult morning and I didn't mean to. The slap was completely inappropriate. I realize that now and You realize it now, Dorothy repeated softly, because you've discovered who I am. But 5 minutes ago, when you thought I was just an elderly customer with a complaint, you felt perfectly justified in your behavior. She paused, letting that sink in, not just for Derek, but for everyone listening. That's the problem, Mr. Holloway. Not that you struck me, though that alone would be sufficient grounds for termination. The problem is that you believed you had the right to strike me because of who you thought I was. A woman in the growing crowd began to clap, slowly at first, then faster. Others joined in. Within seconds, applause filled the store. Not the polite golf clap of a formal event, but the fervent, emotional applause of people who had witnessed injustice and were now seeing the scales begin to balance. Dorothy didn't acknowledge the applause. Her eyes remained fixed on Derek, whose face had begun to crumple. He looked in that moment like a man watching his entire life collapse around him in real time. Mrs. Green? He tried again, his voice breaking. Please, I have a wife, 2 kids, a mortgage. I've been with this company for 12 years. I made a terrible mistake, but I'm begging you. You made multiple mistakes, Dorothy corrected him, still in that gentle, implacable tone. You disrespected a customer. You silenced your employees when they tried to intervene. You used language that suggested prejudice. You physically assaulted someone. And now, you believe that your personal circumstances should excuse those actions. She shook her head slowly. They don't. She pulled her phone from her purse, scrolling through her contacts with fingers that remained perfectly steady despite the red mark still visible on her cheek. She found the number she needed and pressed dial, then activated the speaker function so everyone could hear. The phone rang twice before a professional female voice answered. Riverside Grocery Corporate Headquarters, Regional HR Director Sarah Mitchell speaking. Sarah, this is Dorothy Green. There was a brief pause. Then the voice on the phone shifted from professional neutrality to immediate attention. Mrs. Green, how can I help you? I'm calling from the Martin Luther King Boulevard location, store number 247. I need you to pull up the employee files for the management team here. Derek Holloway, store manager, along with assistant managers Brittany Chen and Troy Patterson. Of course. One moment. The sound of typing came through the speaker. The store had gone completely silent now, every ear straining to hear the conversation. Even the background music seemed to have stopped, though that might have been just perception, the way time seems to slow during critical moments. Derek's legs looked like they might give out. He grabbed the counter with both hands, his knuckles white. Brittany had begun crying quietly, tears streaming down her face. Troy stood frozen, his eyes closed, looking like a man waiting for a guillotine blade to fall. I have their files open, Sarah's voice came back. What do you need? Dorothy's next words were clear, calm, and absolute. Effective immediately. Derek Holloway is terminated for cause: physical assault of a customer, discriminatory language, and hostile behavior. I witnessed it personally. Security should escort him from the premises as soon as they arrive. Derek made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. Understood, Sarah said, her voice taking on a grave tone. I'll process the termination and have security there within 10 minutes. Mrs. Green, are you all right? Do you need medical attention? I'm fine, thank you. For the record, there were multiple witnesses, and I believe several customers have recorded video of the incident. The company may face legal exposure if Mr. Holloway chooses to contest his termination, but I'm confident we can defend our position. Absolutely. And the assistant managers? Dorothy's eyes moved to Brittany and Troy. Brittany was openly weeping now, her whole body shaking. Troy had opened his eyes and was staring at Dorothy with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Brittany Chen, Dorothy said slowly, attempted to intervene appropriately but was silenced by Mr. Holloway. She will remain in her current position, but I want her enrolled in our management leadership program immediately. She showed good instincts today, even if she lacked the confidence to follow through. We can develop that confidence. Brittany's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mrs. Green, she whispered. Troy Patterson, Dorothy continued, and Troy visibly flinched, stood by and allowed this situation to escalate without intervention. He is demoted to stock clerk, effective immediately, with a 6-month probationary period. If he demonstrates improved judgment and ethical behavior during that time, we can discuss restoring his management position. If not, his employment will be terminated. Troy's face showed he understood exactly how close he had come to losing everything. He nodded frantically, unable to speak. Documented, Sarah said through the phone. I'll have the paperwork prepared within the hour. Mrs. Green, would you like me to come down there personally? Not necessary. But I want a mandatory training session scheduled for every employee at this location within the next 2 weeks. The topic will be respect, dignity, and proper customer service. I'll be developing the curriculum myself. Of course, I'll coordinate with you on the details. Is there anything else you need right now? Dorothy glanced around the store, at the customers still watching in stunned silence, at Marcus, who was beaming through tears, at the elderly veteran who had approached and was now standing nearby with his hand over his heart, at the young mother who had returned and was watching with her child, no longer covering the little one's eyes but letting them witness this moment of justice. No, Dorothy said softly. I think we're finished here. I'll send out the communications immediately. And Mrs. Green, I'm so sorry this happened. Thank you, Sarah. Dorothy ended the call and slipped her phone back into her purse. Derek had slumped against the counter, his face in his hands. The sound of sirens could be heard faintly in the distance, either the security team or perhaps the police, if someone had called them earlier. Dorothy picked up her ownership document and returned it to her purse. Then she did something unexpected. She reached across the counter and picked up the carton of spoiled milk. For what it's worth, Mr. Holloway, she said quietly, speaking only to him now, her voice stripped of the earlier steel and simply sad. I hope you learn from this. Not because you lost your job, but because you forgot that every person who walks through these doors deserves respect. Rich or poor, young or old, black or white, every person. She turned away from him then, facing the crowd of customers and employees who had witnessed everything. Her cheek still throbbed where he had struck her, but she stood tall, her dignity intact, her strength evident in every line of her bearing. The applause began again, louder this time, mixed with cheers. People she had never met moved forward to shake her hand, to touch her shoulder, to simply be near someone who had transformed humiliation into justice with nothing more than quiet authority and moral certainty. And Dorothy Green, who had built an empire while staying invisible, who had spent 3 years secretly ensuring this community had access to quality groceries at fair prices, finally allowed herself a small smile. Sometimes, she thought, silence was strength, but sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply stand up and say, "Not today, not here, not to me, and not to anyone else." The security team arrived exactly 8 minutes after Dorothy's phone call ended. 2 uniformed officers, a tall black man named Curtis and a shorter Hispanic woman named Maria, came through the automatic doors with the practiced efficiency of people who had dealt with difficult situations before. But as they entered and saw the crowd gathered around the service desk, the elderly woman standing with quiet authority at its center, and the ashen-faced manager slumped against the counter, they slowed their approach, reading the room with experienced eyes. Curtis spoke first, his voice professional but tinged with confusion. "We got a call about a disturbance and a termination that needed immediate execution. What's the situation here?" Dorothy turned to face them, and something in her bearing, the straight spine, the calm eyes, the air of someone accustomed to command, made both officers instinctively straighten their posture. "I'm Dorothy Green, owner of this store and the parent company. This is Derek Holloway, the now former store manager. He physically assaulted me approximately 15 minutes ago in front of multiple witnesses. I've already contacted corporate HR, and his termination has been processed. He needs to be escorted from the premises immediately." Curtis's eyebrows rose nearly to his hairline. His eyes flickered to the red mark still visible on Dorothy's cheek, then to Derek, who seemed to have aged 10 years in the past 20 minutes. Maria pulled out a small tablet and began taking notes, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. "Ma'am, have you filed a police report?" Maria asked, her tone respectful but concerned. "Physical assault is a criminal matter, not just an employment issue." Dorothy considered this for a moment. Around her, the crowd seemed to hold its breath, wondering if she would press charges, if Derek's humiliation would extend beyond losing his job into potential jail time and a criminal record. "Not yet," Dorothy said finally, "but I'm considering it. For now, I want him removed from this property. His personal belongings can be collected later under supervision." Derek finally found his voice, though it came out cracked and desperate. "Mrs. Green, please. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I'm begging you, don't press charges. My kids, my wife, they depend on me. I'll lose everything." Dorothy turned to look at him fully, and the expression on her face was neither cruel nor kind. It was simply honest. "Mr. Holloway, you should have thought about your family before you raised your hand to another human being. You should have thought about them before you spoke to me with contempt and hatred. You should have thought about them during every moment you chose your ego over doing what was right." I know, Derek said. And tears were streaming down his face now, his voice breaking into sobs. "I was wrong. I was completely wrong. I let my anger control me, and "You let your prejudice control you. Dorothy corrected quietly. Your anger was just the excuse. Be honest with yourself about that at least. The words landed like hammer blows. Derek's face crumpled completely, and he nodded, unable to deny it, unable to defend himself any longer. Curtis moved forward, his voice firm, but not unkind. Sir, I need you to come with us. You can collect your personal effects from your vehicle if you have anything there, but you're not permitted to return to the store floor or access any company systems. I need to get my jacket from the office, Derek said weakly, and there are some photos of my kids on my desk. Maria shook her head. We'll arrange for someone to box up your personal items and have them delivered to you within 48 hours. You need to leave now, sir. As the security officers began to escort Derek toward the exit, he turned back one last time, his eyes finding Dorothy's. I'm sorry, he said, and perhaps for the first time, there was genuine remorse in his voice rather than just fear of consequences. I'm truly, deeply sorry for what I did to you. Dorothy nodded once, acknowledging his words without absolving him. Some actions couldn't be undone with apologies. Some lessons could only be learned through consequences. The crowd parted to let them through, and as Derek walked past, several customers turned away, unwilling to even look at him. Others stared with expressions ranging from contempt to pity. A few of the younger employees watched with something like grim satisfaction. Derek had apparently not been kind to them either, and his fall from power was answering prayers they'd whispered in break rooms and parking lots. Marcus, the young cashier, stood near his register with tears still wet on his cheeks, but his expression was one of fierce pride. He met Dorothy's eyes and mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Once Derek had been escorted through the automatic doors and into the parking lot, the tension in the store seemed to release all at once. People began talking in hushed, urgent tones. Phones were checked for recorded video. The story was already being shared on social media, Dorothy suspected, though she felt oddly detached from that reality. She turned her attention to the remaining employees, who had gradually gathered closer during the confrontation. There were 12 of them on shift: cashiers, stock clerks, deli workers, a pharmacist from the attached pharmacy section. They all looked at her with expressions ranging from awe to anxiety, unsure what would happen next. Brittany, her eyes still red from crying, stepped forward hesitantly. Mrs. Green, I'm so sorry I didn't do more. I should have stood up to him, should have physically stepped between you, should have... Dorothy raised a hand gently, stopping the flow of self-recrimination. You did what you could in a system that punished you for speaking up. That's not your fault. That's a failure of leadership and training, and I take responsibility for not catching it sooner. She looked around at all the assembled employees. How many of you have been afraid of Derek? Every hand went up, some quickly, some slowly, but ultimately every single one. How many of you have seen him treat customers disrespectfully before today? 9 hands rose this time. How many of you have been treated disrespectfully by him yourselves? All 12 hands went up again, and Dorothy felt a familiar ache in her chest, the ache of realizing that something she'd built with good intentions had harbored rot she hadn't seen. Then we have work to do, she said simply, and that work starts now. She gestured toward the break room. I want everyone who's not actively serving a customer to join me in the back for 15 minutes. We need to have a conversation. The employees exchanged uncertain glances, but they began moving toward the break room. Marcus quickly put up a "Please use self-checkout" sign at his register before following. The pharmacist called to his assistant to cover the counter. Within 3 minutes, all 12 employees were crowded into the small break room, some sitting at the worn tables, others leaning against walls or perching on counter edges. Dorothy stood near the coffee maker, her purse still over her shoulder, the red mark on her cheek a visible reminder of why they were all gathered. She took a moment to look at each face, young and old, various races and backgrounds, united by the uniforms they wore and the fear they'd all carried of a manager who'd abused his authority. "First," she began, "I want you to know that what happened today will never happen again in any store I own. Not to a customer, not to an employee, not to anyone. I built this company on the principle that everyone deserves dignity and respect. The fact that I had to be physically assaulted in my own store to discover how badly that principle was being violated is my failure as an owner." "You didn't know?" A young woman named Shanice spoke up from near the back. She worked in the deli. "Derek made sure nothing ever got reported higher up. People who complained too much found their hours cut or got written up for tiny mistakes." Dorothy's jaw tightened. "That ends today. I'm implementing an anonymous reporting system that goes directly to corporate HR, bypassing store management entirely. If anyone experiences harassment, discrimination, or abuse of authority, you'll have a way to report it without fear of retaliation." "Who's going to manage the store now?" Troy asked quietly. He stood in the corner, his earlier confidence completely stripped away, looking like a man still processing his demotion from assistant manager to stock clerk. "I'm promoting Brittany to interim store manager," Dorothy said, and Brittany's head snapped up in shock. She demonstrated good judgment today, even if she didn't have the authority to act on it. We'll provide her with training, support, and a management team that reflects our values. Troy, you'll report directly to her, and whether you ever move back into management depends entirely on the choices you make from this point forward." Troy nodded slowly. "I understand." "And Mrs. Green? I'm sorry, too. I should have stopped him. I knew it was wrong, and I did nothing." "Knowing it was wrong is the first step," Dorothy said. "Doing something about it is the second. You'll have the chance to prove you can take that second step." She turned back to address the whole group. "I'm also raising wages across the board effective next pay period. Everyone in this room will see a 15% increase. That's not a reward for today. That's me correcting what should have been done months ago. You're the people who serve this community every day, and you deserve to be compensated fairly for that work." The room erupted in whispers. A 15% raise wasn't insignificant, especially for workers living paycheck to paycheck. One of the cashiers, a middle-aged woman named Linda, who'd been with the store for 7 years, started crying. "I can finally afford to fix my car," she whispered to the person next to her. "Additionally," Dorothy continued, "we're implementing 2 new policies immediately. First, every employee will receive 4 hours of paid time per month specifically for mental health, doctor's appointments, or personal needs. You shouldn't have to choose between your health and your paycheck. Second, we're creating an employee assistance fund. If anyone faces an emergency, medical bills, car repairs, family crisis, there will be financial support available. No one should lose their home or go hungry because of an unexpected expense." Marcus raised his hand tentatively. "Mrs. Green, why are you doing all this? I mean, I'm grateful, but..." You could have just fired Derek and moved on. Dorothy smiled slightly. I could have. But Derek is a symptom, not the disease. The disease is a workplace culture that didn't empower you to speak up, that didn't protect you from abuse, that didn't value you enough to pay you fairly. I can fire one bad manager, but if I don't fix the system that allowed him to flourish, I've accomplished nothing. She paused, letting that sink in, then continued. I grew up 3 blocks from here. My mother worked 2 jobs to keep us fed. My father worked for the railroad and came home so tired some nights he could barely eat before falling asleep. I know what it's like to work hard and feel invisible, to be treated like you don't matter because you're poor, or black, or just someone society has decided isn't important. I built this company so that people like my parents, like you, like me, would have a place to shop where they were treated with respect. And I employed people like you, so you could earn a living wage, while treating your community with that same respect. She looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. What Derek did today was personal to me, yes, but it was also personal to every single one of you who's ever been made to feel small, who's ever been talked down to, who's ever been hit or hurt by someone with power over you. When I fired him, I wasn't just protecting myself. I was protecting all of us. The silence that followed was profound. It wasn't the silence of fear or uncertainty, but the silence of people absorbing words that touched something deep inside them, something they'd needed to hear perhaps for longer than they realized. Finally, Brittany spoke up, her voice still shaky but stronger than before. "What do you need from us, Mrs. Green?" "I need you to help me rebuild the culture here," Dorothy said. "I need you to speak up when something's wrong. I need you to treat every customer the way you'd want your grandmother treated. I need you to support each other, to create a workplace where everyone feels safe and valued." She smiled. "And I need you to tell me honestly when I'm screwing up, because I'm not perfect either. And the only way we get better is by being honest with each other." "We can do that," Marcus said, and several others nodded in agreement. "Good." Dorothy glanced at her watch. "Now, you've all been away from your stations for longer than planned, and we have customers waiting. Let's get back to work. Brittany, I need you to stay for a few more minutes so we can discuss the transition. Everyone else, thank you for your time and your honesty." As the employees filed out of the break room, several of them paused to shake Dorothy's hand or thank her quietly. Shanice, the deli worker, impulsively hugged her, then stepped back with wide eyes, afraid she'd overstepped. Dorothy just smiled and patted her arm. When the room had cleared except for Brittany, Dorothy pulled out one of the chairs and sat down with a small sigh. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, and she could feel the full weight of the day settling into her bones. Her cheeks still throbbed. Her heart still ached. "Mrs. Green, are you okay?" Brittany asked, concern etched on her young face. "I'm 70 years old, and I just got slapped in public by a man half my age," Dorothy said wryly. "I've been better, but I've also been worse, so let's call it even." Brittany sat down across from her, still looking overwhelmed. "I don't know if I can do this. Be a manager, I mean. I'm only 26. I've only been in retail for 4 years. What if I mess up? What if I can't handle it?" Dorothy reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You know what the difference is between you and Derek. When you mess up, and you will mess up because everyone does, you'll care. You'll want to fix it. You'll listen to feedback. You'll put people before your ego." She smiled. "That's 90% of good leadership right there. The rest we can teach you." I want to make you proud, Brittany said earnestly. Then treat people well, Dorothy said simply. That's all I ask. Treat your employees well. Treat your customers well. Treat yourself well. The profits will follow, and even if they don't, we'll have built something worth having. 20 minutes later, Dorothy finally made her way toward the exit. The store had returned to something approaching normal operation, though normal would probably never quite be the same again. Customers were checking out, employees were restocking shelves, the pharmacy was filling prescriptions. Life continued, as it always did, even after moments that felt world-changing. But as Dorothy walked through the aisles one last time, she noticed differences. Small things, perhaps imperceptible to anyone who hadn't been paying attention, but meaningful nonetheless. Marcus at Register 3 was chatting warmly with an elderly customer, taking time to help her load groceries into her cart despite the line behind her. In the past, Derek would have barked at him to move faster. Now, without that fear, Marcus served with the kindness he'd always wanted to show. In the produce section, one of the stock clerks was helping a young mother select the best apples while her toddler watched with wide eyes. The clerk made funny faces at the child, drawing giggles that rang through the store like bells. Near the bakery, Linda, the cashier who'd been moved to tears about finally being able to fix her car, was recommending fresh bread to a customer with such genuine enthusiasm that the customer ended up buying 3 loaves instead of 1. The atmosphere had shifted. The fear had lifted. In its absence, something else had room to grow: humanity, kindness, the simple decency of people treating each other well. As Dorothy approached the automatic doors, she found herself surrounded by a small crowd. Some were customers who had witnessed the confrontation. Others were employees taking their breaks. A few were people who had simply heard the story secondhand and wanted to see the woman at its center. The elderly veteran she'd noticed earlier stepped forward, his weathered face creased with emotion. He was wearing a cap that identified him as a Vietnam War veteran, and his eyes held the look of someone who had seen both the worst and best of humanity. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gruff with feeling, "I just want you to know that what you did today mattered. Not just for you, but for everyone who's ever been treated like they don't count. My wife passed 3 years ago. And sometimes when I'm out shopping, people look at me like I'm invisible. Like because I'm old and slow, I'm not worth their time. You reminded everyone here that we all deserve respect. Thank you for that." Dorothy felt her eyes prick with unexpected tears. "Thank you for your service," she said quietly. "And I'm sorry about your wife. No one should ever be made to feel invisible." He nodded, saluted her with unexpected formality, and stepped back into the crowd. A young black woman, perhaps in her early 20s, came forward next. She was dressed in scrubs, probably on her way to or from a shift at the hospital. "I work in healthcare," she said, "and I deal with people disrespecting me every single day. Patients who don't want a black nurse. Doctors who talk over me in meetings. Security guards who follow me in stores like this one, assuming I'm going to steal something." Her voice caught. "Seeing you stand up like that, seeing you not back down, seeing you have the power to actually do something about it. I needed that today. I really needed that." Dorothy reached out and squeezed her hand. "You matter. Your work matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." The young woman nodded, wiping at her eyes, and melted back into the crowd. One by one, people came forward. An immigrant from Somalia who'd experienced discrimination at his workplace. A teenage boy who'd been bullied at school. A white woman in her 50s who talked about watching her mother endure racism in the 1970s and feeling helpless to stop it. Each person carried their own story of injustice witnessed or experienced, and somehow, Dorothy's moment of quiet strength had touched something in all of them. Finally, a little girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered something. The mother smiled and nodded, and the little girl approached Dorothy with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "My mama says you're a hero," the little girl announced. "Are you like Wonder Woman?" Dorothy laughed, a genuine warm sound that felt like release after the tension of the past hour. She knelt down, her knees protesting slightly, until she was at eye level with the child. "I'm not Wonder Woman, sweetheart. I'm just a regular person who decided that being treated badly wasn't acceptable. You know what that means?" The little girl shook her head. "It means you can be a hero too. Anytime you see someone being mean to someone else, anytime you see something that's not fair, you can speak up. You can say, 'That's not right.' You can stand up for what's good. You don't need superpowers to do that. You just need courage." The little girl's eyes went wide with wonder. "Can girls be heroes even when they're old like you?" Dorothy laughed again. "Especially when they're old like me. We've had lots of practice." The child's mother mouthed, "Thank you," over her daughter's head, and Dorothy stood up, her knees creaking in protest, feeling every one of her 70 years, but also feeling more alive than she had in months. As she finally pushed through the automatic doors and stepped into the late afternoon sunshine, Dorothy paused to take a breath. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the promise of evening. The parking lot stretched before her, ordinary and peaceful, giving no sign of the drama that had unfolded inside. Her car was parked in the back corner. She never took the close spots, always leaving those for elderly customers or parents with young children. As she walked toward it, she pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Dorothy!" Her best friend Margaret's voice came through warm and concerned. "I was just thinking about you. How's your day been?" Dorothy laughed, a sound somewhere between humor and exhaustion. "Oh, Margaret, you're not going to believe what just happened." As she recounted the story, the expired milk, the confrontation, the slap, the revelation, the firing, Margaret interrupted with gasps and exclamations. By the time Dorothy finished, she had reached her car and was leaning against it, face tilted toward the sun. "Dorothy Elizabeth Green," Margaret said with a mixture of awe and affection, "you are something else. Are you okay? Really okay?" Dorothy considered the question honestly. Her cheek still hurt. Her heart still carried the ache of disappointment, not in Derek specifically, but in the reality that hatred and prejudice still found such easy purchase in the world. She was tired, bone-deep tired, the kind that came from carrying the weight of other people's pain and trying to transform it into something better. But she was also proud that she'd stood her ground, proud that she'd used her power to protect rather than punish, proud that she'd created a moment where justice prevailed, where dignity was restored, where people were reminded that silence didn't have to mean acceptance. "Yeah," she said finally. "I'm okay. More than okay, actually. I remembered something today." "What's that?" that the work isn't finished. That building something good means constantly protecting it from people who would corrupt it. That ownership isn't just about having your name on a piece of paper, it's about taking responsibility for the culture you create and the people you employ. She paused. I got comfortable, Margaret. I thought I could buy these stores, set up good systems, and trust that everything would run smoothly. But you can't delegate integrity. You can't outsource compassion. You have to show up, pay attention, and be willing to act when things go wrong. Sounds like you're about to get a lot less comfortable, Margaret observed. Probably, Dorothy agreed. I think I need to visit the other stores more often, not as a secret shopper, but as the owner. Let people know who I am. Make sure they know they can come to me if there are problems. Build relationships with employees so they feel comfortable speaking up before things get to the point they did today. That's a lot of work for a woman who's supposed to be enjoying her retirement, Margaret said gently. Dorothy smiled. I tried retirement. Turns out I'm not very good at it. Besides, this doesn't feel like work. It feels like purpose. It feels like being my mother's daughter, my father's daughter. It feels like honoring everything they taught me about showing up, doing right, and never letting silence be complicity. They talked for a few more minutes before saying goodbye, and Dorothy climbed into her car. As she started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, she glanced back at Riverside Grocery in her rearview mirror. The building looked the same as it had this morning. Same brick facade, same sign. Same automatic doors sliding open and closed as customers came and went. But everything was different now. Inside those walls, employees were working without fear. Customers were being served with respect. A young woman named Brittany was stepping into leadership with support instead of sabotage. A man named Troy was learning that redemption required not just remorse, but changed behavior. And everyone who had witnessed what happened was carrying the story with them, sharing it with friends and family, planting seeds of the idea that quiet strength could change everything. Dorothy drove slowly through the neighborhood where she'd grown up, past the house where she'd lived as a child. Now, home to a young family with bicycles in the yard. Past the school she'd attended, recently renovated with a new playground. Past the church where her mother had sung in the choir every Sunday, still standing, still serving, the afternoon sun making its stained glass windows glow like jewels. This community had shaped her. It had taught her resilience and dignity, courage, and compassion. And now, in her own way, she was giving back to it, ensuring that the stores serving these streets would treat every person who walked through their doors as someone who mattered. As she turned onto the highway heading home, Dorothy thought about the little girl who'd called her a hero. She thought about the veteran who'd thanked her for reminding everyone that respect was non-negotiable. She thought about Marcus and Brittany and all the employees who'd been freed to do their jobs with kindness instead of fear. And she thought about Derek Holloway, whose moment of violence had cost him everything but might if he was willing to learn, teach him something his 12 years of employment never had. That power without compassion is just tyranny in a name tag. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Dorothy felt something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, but something close to it. Contentment, perhaps, or simply the satisfaction of knowing that when faced with injustice, she hadn't looked away. She had stood firm. She had spoken truth. She had transformed a moment of humiliation into a lesson about dignity that would ripple outward in ways she might never fully see or understand. And that, Dorothy thought as she drove toward home with the last light of day warming her face, was enough. The story of Dorothy Green reminds us that respect isn't earned, it's owed. Every person you encounter, regardless of their age, race, occupation, or appearance, deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. You never know who you're talking to. You never know what battles they've fought, what mountains they've climbed, what scars they carry beneath their smile. But more importantly, it shouldn't matter. You shouldn't have to be the owner of a company to deserve respect. You shouldn't have to be wealthy or powerful or important to be treated with kindness. You should be treated well simply because you're human, because treating people well is the baseline of decent behavior, not an achievement to be celebrated. Silent strength isn't about being quiet in the face of injustice. It's about responding with measured, effective action instead of matching violence with violence, hatred with hatred. It's about maintaining your dignity even when others try to strip it away. It's about knowing your worth even when the world tries to convince you you're worthless. And for those of you who have power, whether it's economic power, social power, or just the power of privilege, remember that with power comes responsibility. You have a choice every single day. Use that power to lift others up or push them down, to create cultures of respect or cultures of fear, to be part of the solution or part of the problem. Dorothy Green used her power to transform a moment of violence into a teaching moment. She could have simply pressed charges and walked away. She could have sought revenge or public humiliation beyond what Derek brought on himself. Instead, she chose restoration, not just for herself, but for everyone working in that store, everyone shopping in that store, everyone who would hear this story and carry it forward. That's the power of choosing dignity over revenge. That's the power of choosing justice over retaliation. That's the power of standing up and saying, "This ends here, this ends now, not with me and not with anyone else." Where are you watching from? Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment like this? What did you do? What do you wish you'd done? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary courage in everyday moments. Remember, you don't need to own a company to make a difference. You just need to refuse to accept injustice as normal. You just need to speak up when others are silent. You just need to treat every person you meet as someone who matters, because they do. Be like Dorothy. Stand tall, stand firm, and never let anyone convince you that dignity is negotiable.